Hi, I'm Kelsey Chapman, and I will be doing my presentation on pageant wagons. I decided to do a pageant wagon because I am primarily interested in sets and the history of sets and how they came about. And I thought that the idea of a pageant wagon was incredibly interesting because it was a movable set. And it was one of the only times, I believe the only time in history, where there was, in fact, a movable set. Um, they were put on wheels. They were stages put on wheels. There were two different main ideas that came about by Glenn Wickham, who wrote a book called Early English Stages, where he countered the idea of David Rogers, who talked about the idea of having two different stories in a pageant wagon. They would use the different stories usually because of the idea of most of the plays, which usually would represent hell and heaven and then earth. And they talked about the idea of using the street as hell, the actual stage as earth, and the top as heaven. But it was challenged because the idea of this meant that the pageant wagons would be around 15 feet tall, and that was not including the wheels. The wheels and the different ways that they covered the bottom of the pageant wagons with fabric would have made it increasingly taller than the 15 feet. I decided for my project to construct a copy of Glenn Wickham's idea of the pageant wagon. There's actually a idea of it in the book on page 86, and you can see the way that he constructed it if you guys wanted to look at that. I thought it was incredibly cool, and then I really liked the other figure, 412, that showed a lot of the different extras that they would add on. I liked having the comparison of the horses to the stages, because although normally when you do set models, especially like nowadays, we do people, and we put people inside of the stages. But I just thought it was really interesting to be able to have the horses as a reference. These pageant wagons were used as a way to tell different stories. Being the time, a lot of the time it had to do with the Christian religion. Most popular in Europe during the Middle Ages. It was also used by Spain, and they also possibly used it in their Corpus Christi festivals. So I went ahead and built this one. That's my little man, just to kind of give you a reference to the rest of the stage. That is a 6-foot tall man. So as you can see, I'm going to tilt it down so that you can see the actual model. Oh, my guy just fell. So the cool thing that they had with these is that you would have the front acting area, which would have been up here, and you can see on the side, this would have been the main acting area in here. And on some of them, apparently not all of them, but some of them, on top here, you would have the place where you would have your machine loft, which is where you could, obviously do different special effects for your show. this one you would pull up into the street, and typically it would be about 2 sizes of this in length. So if you can see, it would be 2 of these, oops, excuse me, I guess I need to do on the other side, 2 of these long, and just for, again, reference, this is about 12 feet tall, and that does not include the machine loft, which I decided not to include. Under the curtains, though, typically in the way that Wickham described it would be the wheels. In other pictures, like you do see on 412, you can see that the wheels will come out from the side. But I thought it was really cool being able to hide the wheels because it gives it more of a realistic feel. So the way that these were used, and I'm going to put this back. I think I lost my little man. The way that these were used is you would get more than one. Obviously, you had the original one and then the one in front, which you would pull up beside it. But besides these, you could have up to like 16 or 17 of these pageant wagons, and they would be set up around town, and they would be different parts of a play. These different parts of the play, the townspeople would walk around and go from like point A to point, F, and you'd go A, B, C, D in order of the story. That way you were able to learn the entire story, and each one of the different pageant wagons did a different part of the story. I thought it was really interesting because in the Episcopalian Church, at least in the Southeastern Episcopalian Church, I thought it was really interesting because one of our traditions is something called Stations of the Cross. And the interesting part about that is that in the actual church, whereas most of the services you sit and you listen, you actually walk around the church, and you do different, what is called Stations of the Cross, which is different parts of the story of Jesus' death, going from the very beginning of the night to Jesus raising from the dead, essentially, in the liturgy. So I just thought that was really cool because I feel like it really relates to the setup of the pageant wagon. The other last thing that I thought was really interesting, sometimes I don't connect certain things in history just because they are separated into different sections of history. But one thing I found really cool in a man's article that he was writing was the idea that there was, in fact, iron during this time period. So as a lot of the actual structure of the pageant wagon could very well have been made of wood, the horses' bridles and saddles, as well as, most importantly, the wheels and axles of the pageant wagons would very easily could have been made from iron. And the author of the section suggested that that could have been very possible. The last thing I wanted to talk about was just the way that the pageant wagon actors worked. It was very much, that was their pageant wagon. They always had that pageant wagon, and they always acted on that pageant wagon, which is very cool because then they really understand their pageant wagon to the most full extent. So that's my project. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope I got to teach you something about pageant wagons. Thanks, guys.